Phil Bauman here with Health is Social. I want to talk today about something that I don't think gets enough attention, that doesn't get enough critical analysis, and doesn't get enough discussion in the right channels, and that's the issue of domestic violence. In particular, the unique challenges, dangers, as well as opportunities with the combination of domestic violence and social media. But first, a few definitions of what I consider domestic violence. And by the way, that phrase domestic violence is a terribly interesting and kind of odd combination of words. Violence is not domestic, and yet it's a popular term. We use it. People know what you're talking about. Or do we? Do we really know what that means? And my definition of domestic violence is that violence includes emotional, financial, and physical, among other kinds of abuses. It can range from subtle manipulation to implicit threats to outright murder, hitting murder. It's a very deep issue. It's a very subtle one. It's one that's fraught with a lot of complicated nuances. And for purposes of this video, I'm going to just basically focus on male-on-female violence, only because it's the most popular. Yes, there are women abusers of men in relationships. That happens, although in a lot of cases what's really going on is a woman can't stand it anymore and hits back. But I don't want to prejudice the issue and make sweeping generalizations, but just for purposes of simplicity, when I talk about instances, I'm just going to refer to male-on-female violence, and the abuse of children. I would also actually include the spanking of children in the definition of domestic violence. I know that's a terribly controversial topic about parents hitting their children. I'm going to be clear in mind, it's wrong. There's never a good time to ever hit a child. Since when? Since when is it a good thing to hit a child? So I'm going to include that in the definition of domestic violence. And the psychological effect of a child watching his or her mother or father, if that's the case, being abused in whatever form that abuse takes, has lifelong consequences. And the children are the future, and so we really need to pay attention to this. So those are the basic definitions. So fast forwarding to 2010 and the 21st century with respect to social media, everybody now is getting online. More and more people are using mobile devices, social media like Twitter and Facebook and all of the other stuff that'll probably evolve over the next few years. And what's interesting is these social media pose a whole new set of challenges, perhaps unlike any other intersection of different fields. For instance, in healthcare, there's tremendous value in healthcare and social media, and it gets a lot of discussion going on now. I'm involved in those. That's kind of what I tend to focus on. And I'm a big believer in sort of people being able to open up and providers not having to worry about HIPAA and somehow finding that balance between patient confidentiality and dignity with the need and the value of patients going online to network, to know where to go if they're newly diagnosed with, say, cancer. Where do I go? What do I do? I've never been involved in this. What should I do? I think social media has a help in that. But domestic violence is different, because the victims of domestic violence, and we'll talk about the case of male-on-female relationships, and there is such a thing as female-on-male domestic violence. It's a smaller percentage of what happens, and probably in a lot of cases, even there, it's women who can't take it anymore, and they hit back. But anyway, back to domestic violence and social media. A lot of times it's women are being stalked. It's part of the abuse. It's part of the violence. And by violence, I don't just mean physical hitting. The violence is emotional. It's financial control. The violence is a violation of freedom. That's essentially what it is. That's what violence is. It's taking your freedom to just be alive and happy away. And so the violence can range from subtle manipulation to implicit threats to outright murder. And so a lot of times part of the abuse is basically stalking, cyber stalking. So in a world where you can go on Twitter and tell the world what's going on, or on Facebook where you can have discussions with your friends and theoretically tell the world what's going on, the problem with that is a lot of these guys who are terribly insecure, whose insecurity is so deep that they have basically no control over this, and so they seek control and security in the visceral and emotional pain of others. Well, these guys will implant spyware. They have control over what kind of cell phones to use. I mean, the level of control is scary, and it varies. It's a spectrum. Sometimes it's light and sometimes it's heavy. But you can see where I'm going. Whereas you and I, if you're not a victim of domestic violence, you can go online. You don't have to have that worry. Victims of domestic violence do. And they need to have that awareness. So here's kind of the painful paradox. On one hand, social media can help victims of domestic violence meet two basic needs, which is the need for support and resources. And social media can help to connect people to those two things. If they really can't go online, if they have to be careful about the websites they visit because they're being tracked, it's a real problem. So how do we address that? How can a victim of domestic violence use social media appropriately in a safe way? I don't know. I'm going to pose that in front of a question. I'm not an expert here. I'm just opening it up because I don't see much of an opportunity. And if you happen to be coming to this video, or where this video is embedded in the blog post, I'd like to know what the expert answers are. And if there really aren't, then we need to figure it out. And then the other thing is how do organizations, whether it's hospitals, nonprofits, really tap into the value of social media and really use it for this important stuff, which is not only to raise awareness, but actually really tackle this problem because it's a fundamental one. I think domestic violence and child abuse in this country and really the rest of the world is far deeper and far wider than we know. And if you think about it, if you're the victim of somebody who is manipulating you, you're probably going to be terrified to tell a doctor or tell anybody. And the complication in social media is even if somebody has a Facebook page and they're having a private conversation or it's kind of public but only limited to their friends and they don't think that their abuser will see it, well, Facebook is not a safe place for that. Your comment gets liked, somebody else comments on it, account gets hacked, it's just not safe. And so that's the real cruelty of what's going on here. So there are some organizations, there are some nonprofits that are slowly starting to get online and setting up these accounts. I don't know how effective they are, and I'm going to do a little bit more research on that and incorporate that on the blog post. But we really need to address this. This isn't something that gets talked enough about. I know that there's a lot of talk about the e-patient movement, but if you think about this particular class, these are patients too, in the sense that there's all sorts of mental health issues, clearly physiological effects. You can probably chase, for children who grow up in these environments, you're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, probably obesity, and eventually diabetes, heart disease, later in life, chronic depression. It's so not good. It's so not good. And if these people grow up, if they go into government and all, and they have these issues, that's an unhealthy state of affairs, and it directly impacts you and me. Okay, whether you pay attention to this issue or not. I think it's one of the most important ones. And if we're to call ourselves a civilization, we need to deal with this. Now, the answer to this is not to shame the abusers. It's not to shame parents who hit their kids, because a lot of times the cycle is they were shamed themselves as children, and the cycle continues. And there's not enough resources out there to give parents alternatives of what to do when you have, for instance, a child who's having a temper tantrum, that you don't have to hit them. In fact, it's just wrong. When is it ever right to hit a child? It never is. There are alternatives, and that's what being a parent is about. You're the adult, and when you hit a child, you're being a child. That's why we have to grow up so that we don't become child abusers. And we need a culture that has a zero-tolerance policy for violence of all kinds, emotional as well as physical. So I'm going to try to close this video so it doesn't go on forever, but it's a really important issue, and I think we need to really put our minds to it. like I said, I'm not an expert here, but I'm a finger pointing to the moon, and I hope more people get involved in this conversation. I hope nurses and doctors and social workers, journalists who are covering this in the whole pan. I even think healthcare marketers have a role to play in this. That we need to raise more awareness, and it's nice to have campaigns to raise breast cancer through races and all. That's all wonderful, but the issue of domestic violence is just as pernicious as cancer, and cancer's malicious. So is domestic violence. Let's do our best to address this. Let's use these tools to really tackle important stuff. Even when we have fun doing other things, I think we can tackle this together. I think we can open this up, crowdsource it, but we need to understand the subtle dangers involved here. So that's it. That's the beginning of the conversation. I hope you are a part of this. I am Phil Bauman. This is a post for Health is Social. If you have any questions, please leave a comment on the blog. Initially, you can go over to healthissocial.com. Health is social. Domestic abuse, domestic violence, it's antisocial. It's evil. And if you're the victim, be smart, be safe, find resources, but be careful how you go about going to them. And if you have children, make sure that they're safe too. That's really important.